Hi, I'm Julian Goodacre and I've been making bagpipes since 1983, which is nearly 40 years, I can't believe it. And I want to pass on some of my skills, so I'm making a series of videos for YouTube. First one was on seasoning bagpipe bags and bellows. The next one was on making bagpipe bags. And this one is on a very big subject. It's on drilling and reaming holes, which is basic to bagpipe making. There's a lot a big topic to cover, and so I'm going to have to talk very fast. But the beauty of YouTube is you've got a little button down there that you can alter my speed and speed me up and slow me down, whichever you like. Anyway, every pipe maker's developed their own techniques. We all talk between us and share ideas, but this is what I do and it works for me, and hopefully it'll be of some benefit to you. So before coming into my workshop, let's start with some basics. Sound is produced by vibrating air, and musical instruments are made to control these vibrations by various means to produce specific notes. Woodwind and brass instruments control the air vibrations in a wooden or a brass tube, and by varying the length of that tube. Our chosen instrument is bagpipes, and our tubes are mostly made of wood, and we contain the air mercilessly in a bag and then squeeze it out through a reed through a tube of varying lengths to produce that note. So how we create the inside dimensions of these various tubes is really important, and on this video we're going to be focusing on bagpipe chanters and on drones and of course bagpipe stocks. So come on in and have a look at the workshop. So these are the drills I use in my pipe making, and I'm going to show you each one, and after that I'm going to show you me using them, and finally I'm going to show you how to make some of them and to sharpen them. Right, so with drilling holes it's important to think, what do we want to achieve? And you're going for fast and accurate drilling and something that clears the shavings. And some holes are cylindrical, some are stepped, they're cylindrical and then down, and then some are conical. And what matters to us is that the inside must be smooth, and so it really pays to think about how a drill cuts. It's really important to think about the angle that the cutting edge of the drill bit meets the wood. At that angle, that is going to dig in. It's not going to be a nice cut at all. If you go to the other extreme and do it really fine, that you may cut really beautifully, but that tip is very, very thin and will blunt and right away. What you're looking for is a happy medium of that angle, which is smooth enough to be smooth, but not to dig in. And there are other angles here as well. That is the approach for cutting, but also we use scraping. So rather than using that, we would be using like that on the wood and scraping it. And that is a system that works really well. I'll explain later about building up a burr edge on the end of it, but my main conical reaming is done with scraping rather than cutting. The best known drill bit is and easily available is the twist drill bit. They're great, they work in metal and in wood, but they have disadvantages in that they're not very accurate actually. They tend to wander because it doesn't have a very accurate center point. It kind of mashes its way into the wood to start with, and once it's got in there, then it can cut with these these should be really sharp, and it shifts the shavings really well. The best way to use them is to start drilling a small hole and working up to the size that you require. A lot of pipe makers have tried to use long ones for drilling initial bores, and they do wander a bit. So there are better ways of doing it. When I'm drilling in the lathe with twist drills, I always start with a centre bit. This creates a pilot hole, which is very, very accurate because they don't have much flex in them at all. They have the same process of sort of mashing to start with, but they produce a really well-centered hole for the twist drills to follow. A variation on the twist drill is the brad point drill bit, or lip and spur drill. It's got exactly the same body, it's just sharpened in a different way. You've got a very precise brad point on the end, and then the cutting edges go up towards the edge with really sharp points there. So when it goes into the wood, those points will cut, hopefully, a really sharp edge to the hole. Makes very neat holes and clears the shavings like a twist drill perfectly well. These you can make yourself or resharpen yourself, or you can buy sets of them. Now, one of the challenges of making pipes is drilling long, accurate and very thin holes in wood, and metal has the ability to bend, and so do drill bits. And I started making D bits to start with. This is what I call D bit. It's silver steel rod, half of it filed away, and a very specific cut put on the end of it, an angle there of about 20 degrees and an angle down there of about 20 degrees. I do a few cuts there so that when the shavings are packed in there, they've got something to grip on, and then you pull them out again. Not very satisfactory, but pipe makers have been using their variations of this for centuries. They're frustrating, and when they work well, they work well. I'll show you how to make them later on in the video, and good luck. Gun drills have changed my life and a lot of other pipe makers as well. They're made for drilling in steel, but they can be resharpened by the makers to work just in wood. You have compressed air blown through this tube, but this tube is in a sort of half moon shape. Compressed air comes out on the cutting tip, and so the shavings are just blown out, so you can just feed it in. Things keep cool because of the compressed air. This is a very complicated drill tip here, and it makes things so much easier. However, it's more expensive. You need more clobber, you need compressor and pipes and holders and everything, and things can still bend. It's not without its problems, but they're expensive and they're worth every penny. Step drills. These are basically the same as the D bit, only they have a little feather on the front that follows the bore, because you've created a very narrow bore with your gun drill and you may want to put a step in it, and so this will fit into your narrow bore and then cut in exactly the same way. There's a little knife edge there, and you have to keep on withdrawing it to take the shavings out. I've made all sorts of different variations on these over the years, and this one, for example, a big one, is made with a removable feather, so you can actually, it can follow different sized holes. And for making drone slides, I use these slightly undersize of the final size I want it to be, and then I use what I call a parallel reamer, which I make myself. I've experimented with all sorts of different angles, but it's basically taper there and then a slice off there, and then I sharpen that edge and put a burr edge on that, and that can just go through and put a nice surface on a slightly undersized hole and get it to the right size and a really polished inside surface. Another type of drill bit which I don't use so often now is a Forstner bit. It has a saw edge around the outside and a really good point there, and the actual cutting is done by these knives, and It cuts very precisely into the wood, it lifts the shavings out, and you can have a flat bottom to it. It's not very good in end grain, and I'm not using it very often. In fact, the only time I use them now is for drilling the valve on my bellows boards. Now we come to a big challenge, and that is creating a conical hole in wood. In my small pipes, which theoretically have a cylindrical bore, I actually put a slight cone in the bottom, only very slight taper. And for that I use a triangular reamer, which I made myself. I'll show you about making one later on. And so that has pretty sharp edges. You could almost cut yourself with that. And that put into the wood, it just scrapes the inside surface of the wood. But to create a conical chanter, you have to find some way of reaming it, and a consistent way, and with the inside really smooth. And different pipe makers have come up with all sorts of different ways of doing it. This is a steel cone, and half of it has been machined off, and then a burr edge has been put on that. That's an old bombard reamer, which I don't use myself really. This is another reamer, similar one, but it hasn't been flattened off. It's had a certain angle put in. The pipe makers often discuss which segment, what angle of the segment should be taken out. I haven't used that one at all. I swear in a museum in France somewhere I've seen one of these. These were made in Britain for chair makers, I think. But I swear in a museum in France I saw a beautiful long one made for a reamer for a chanter. And this is lovely because this actually cuts. It's an upward cut. And these are lovely. If you find a long one somewhere, sell it to me. There are also pipe makers now who are using fluted reamers. This is not a tapered one, but you can get tapered ones if you've got enough money, which scrapes beautifully and will create a really consistent inside measurement. What I've used always is what traditional pipe makers in Scotland have used, which is a D-shaped reamer which scrapes, and it's made out of a flat piece of steel. I can show you how it's made, and it cuts with a burr edge along here, and I've always found them very consistent and have worked very well for me. Right, I'm going to drill a chanter stock in U. We'll start with a chunky great centre bit, a half-inch one, and which should take things nice and central. Enter slowly. Yeah, that's nice. It doesn't clear the shavings very well. You have to pull it back a bit. See, that's nice and central. Then I go up to half an inch, and half an inch, I just want to waste as much of the wood as quickly as possible. We're through. This looks quite laborious doing it this way, because actually I use that lathe for doing it, and that has a different tailstock, but it has a tailstock with a lever on it, so I can have the chuck in there and I can move really quickly in and out with the drill. I believe that Harrison's, who made this Jubilee lathe, did make some of these. I've never come across one of these for this. If you know of one, I'll give you 100 quid for it, because it would speed things up a lot. The reason I'm not using that lathe is because Euan, our bold cameraman, would have to be standing outside the window to get the right angle to see what's happening. So I'm using the Harrison at the moment. Right, we've gone up one size now to 9/16. And this should be quite quick, this, because we're not shifting very much wood now. Right, after that, we're going up to 11/16. And you see I've marked the blue tape, so I don't go in and hit the chuck. And now finally, this is the size I want. And I usually car canny when I go in there. Just take it easy, because I'm wanting to get the nicest possible shine on the inside. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Still cutting, just coming out the far end. The proof of the pudding now is holding it up and seeing whether I go, oh, that's lovely, or ooh, God, that's a bit rough. And I would say that's lovely. I don't know whether you can catch sight of that. The next phase would be to put super glue down there just to act as a kind of varnish and sink into the wood. And then I'll ream out again with one of my one of my parallel reamers, finally, to create the smoothest of inside diameters. So that's it. I talked about brad point bits. I've got this set here which I only use for finger holes on my chanters. And the chanter sits in a little trolley, and there are two rails there that holds it tight. I've got a center point there, a center line there, and it lines up with where each finger hole should be and what size it is. And I have all this. I use this for various different chanters, and I just use old hacksaw blades actually for positioning them. It's quite a neat way. So I can store information from different types of chanters. God knows what this chanter is. I'm just going to drill some holes in it. So it says 3/16 there. It says finger there. So this can tell me whether it's on the front or back or whether it's angled, but I'm keeping them as finger hole there. And the beauty of these lip and spur, these brad point ones, is it just makes a little hole exactly where you want it, you know, and it's not going to shift from there. It's not going to wobble like a twist drill would. And look at that. A finger hole has been placed in a chanter which doesn't need a finger hole there. So that's the process, basically. You can go up and down putting all your finger holes in, and if you've got thumb hole, you can turn it round to the thumb position and do it on the back. That's my system for drilling holes. Right, I'm using an old lathe, but a very good lathe, and I've had to modify it quite considerably to do gun drilling. All these parts aren't available just off the shelf, so you have to be inventive with doing anything like this. First of all, the actual cutting, I mean, the wood moves and the drill stays still, as you shall see. The wood is held in place by a tailstock, which has a sharp circle around there. That's what actually bites into the wood. So have that in first. And then I've created also a stop to stop the, while I'm feeding it in, stop it going too far, because I don't want it hitting the chuck. I do notice there's a hole there where a drill must have drifted, and that would have cost me 50 or 100 pounds, because the tips on the end of these gun drills do snap off, and they can be put back on at a price, and each time you do that, the drill gets a little bit shorter. The drill itself is held in a holder that I made, a tube, and the front here, which has this board on it because the shavings come out at a bit of an angle. That's going to go on the compressor. I have this to prevent the drill going too far, but also to hold it parallel to the bed of the lathe. So, and also in the chuck I have a wooden, no, it's not wooden actually, this is plastic, to plug, so that if I do come out when I come out the other end, it doesn't have any chance of hitting the chuck. So I put that through, and I can put this through this. And I want to take this to the point where it's just coming through. Yeah, that'll do. Now it tightens it in place. That could go a fraction further. Then I put my wooden blank in. This is cherry, only grew a few 100 yards away from here. We're going to be making a border horn, basic border horn there. So that's locked into the lathe. I then put a centre in there, just a point, to link up with the centre of on the wood. Lock this in place, and then with this C whatever it is, spanner, I tighten it in just so it cuts a circle in the end grain. It doesn't have to go in very far. You don't have to have a lot of friction there, so that can now turn. We're getting nearer the drilling point, but I should say this is kind of scary. In the years, especially in the old years of D-drills, I'd be feeding it in and bringing it out and feeding it in, and it'd be getting hot, and I'd quench it in oil, and that didn't work, and put it back in and squelch it in water, and things still went wrong. So you could start up with a lovely piece of wood, all enthusiastic there, and then find it's gone at a horrible, horrible runoff. Runoff like that it can only be used for stocks. The worst thing happened with this one. I was working an 8th hole, and after putting the drill in about that far, I couldn't see where it was coming. It would actually come out the side. So depression. That doesn't happen so often with gun drills, I have to say. So yeah, we're about ready. All I have to do now is get the compressor and clip it on, and soon it will commence. Right. My gun drilling got a lot better once John Swain and Mike York told me that they go at really high speed, which I never used to. It's really important to get that initial hole parallel. I used to use that centre drill, but now I just use a taper there, not a taper, it's a slight guide there. There we go, we're switched on. It's really fast. I can't tell you what speed it is, but we push in, and this entry point is so critical. But once you're in and the shavings are coming back, there's nothing you can really do, but you've got to listen out for those shavings coming out, because if they don't, if they jam, things can heat up and get pretty nasty. You can lose the end of a drill bit. So I'm not pushing hard, I'm just easing it in, and here we come, waiting for that sound when it comes through the other end. And yeah, that's what I'm looking for. So withdraw the drill, switch off lathe and compressor, and now the fun thing, will I have achieved a bullseye? I can't wait to see. Oh yes, spot on, I've got a smile on my face. Right, we're going to step drill a drone blank here. This is a Leicestershire small pipe drone, and there is a 1/2 inch hole going about that depth, and it has to have a very smooth inside because the drone, that's where you tune the drone. So this is working with a step drill, and that hole is 1/2 inch, but this is undersized, is about 64th undersized. So to start with, it's a bit fast that, I'll slow it down a bit. After a while, I don't bother with the tailstock and I just push. And if occasionally it does get hot, I put a little bit of candle wax on, just cools it down. Right, once I've got so far, that is going to be centered so well because that feather is fitting in the bore. I just want to waste some of wood in a hurry. So what I do is I've got a twist drill. I'll just show you that twist drill, which I put a much sharper angle on. It doesn't have, the point isn't important because that doesn't even go into the, that's going into thin air. And this is a way of shifting wood quite fast. Yeah, that's just shifting the wood. So now that's an undersized 1/2 inch. And now we want to take it up to actually 2 1/2 inch exactly. So this is the parallel side reamer. Right, so I've got an undersized 1/2 inch hole there. And now I'm going to put the parallel reamer in, and it's just going to be skimming just a little off the inside, just to sweeten it up. So now we have a hole centered on that hole and with a nice smooth inside. You can't see that, but it is got good smooth inside for a drone slide, which is what you want. The small pipes I make actually have a slight taper in the bottom of the bore, the bottom 2/3 of it, which I'm use with this, I create with this triangular reamer. It's very simple to use. You have to be careful not to push too far in case it twists. I'm the only person who's ever used this reamer, and it has got a twist on it, so it must have been me at some stage. You just, this is scraping. And that's all you do, really. It brings out just a little shaving from it. And that's it. Hey presto, it's done. Right, this is the big one. This is making a conical bore. You start off by gun drilling. You saw me drill that hole. And rather than reaming this whole thing out, which would be outrageous to do, you step it. So there's a series of steps down there so that when you put the reamer in, you're only just working on the tops of each step. And I start from the middle 3/8 there and then step down from there, and then I go down, step down to the narrower and narrow that end. So we start at the middle 3/8. Have to withdraw quite a lot because it doesn't hold the shavings, very many shavings. So we go in a certain way, and because I'm in a hurry, I skip over to a twist drill, which I've sharpened really very sharp. I mean, at the angle is very sharp, and that, with any luck, will remove quite a bit in a short time. Seems a bit of a wheeze, but it works. Right, now I've got 3/8 out of the way, I can start on the biggest diameter, 1/2 inch. I've preset all these to the correct depth, don't want to go too far at all. And this step drill actually has 2 flats either side. It's quite nifty, so it should hold more shavings. That's the idea. Can put a little bit of not beeswax, candle wax on just to cool things off, reduce the friction. Getting there. A little bit more. Right, that's up to the mark. So now we've done 1/2 inch. What have we got next? 7/16, I would imagine. Oh, that went nicely. Now we're going to smaller feathers because we're going further down the bore into the bit that I haven't put a step drill in yet. This is 1/4 inch. Right up to the mark. And now all we're left with is, I think, 7/32, if I recall rightly. Oh. I like 7/32. I always really like that. Here we go. Right, so that is step drilled. are ready for reaming. Right, reaming the chanter. It's really important to keep your reamer sharp and keep that burr edge in place. When they cut well, they cut just wonderfully, but if not, you have to stop and do work on them. So I'm hoping to get it right up to that point. That's where I'm aiming. And you can see it's cutting a lot there and a lot there. This is cutting the top of all the steps off there. It hasn't started. It'll be a long way before it's all cut through. How are we doing? Yeah, there's not cutting there yet. The inside bore looks lovely, actually. I can't see any steps there at all. Oh yes, I can. One or two. I'll take it a little bit further. It should be going right up to that step, but I'm not going to do that right now. Yeah, that's got it out. That's lovely. So after that, the next stage is to trickle super glue down there, let that set for a day or so, and then put the reamer back in to give a really nice polish on the inside. That's making a conical bore. Right, twist drills, they're readily available and they come very sharp, and there's a lot on YouTube about how to sharpen them. So if you are going to try and sharpen them, I would, especially small ones, I would look at a big one and sort of get the ideas from the big one and use it on a small one as well. Anyway, a useful wheeze is if you can get a load of Morse taper ones. This material down here is really quite soft, so you can actually, I think this was a Morse taper one to start with, and if you've got metal turning lathe, you can put a shorter shank on it. That's, if you can get a load of Morse taper ones cheap, then good luck. Lip and spur, brad point ones. It's tricky to sharpen them, but it can be done, and I've created, I think this was a normal one to start with. The important thing is to make sure that both tip is touching at the same time. I don't think this one quite does, but that's important, so they both cut when they dig into the wood, that they're both cutting at the same time. As I said, I think before, I don't use these big ones anymore for boring end grain. I use normal twist drills for that. I want to talk about creating a burr edge. You'll find quite a lot on YouTube and things about cabinet scrapers, and this is a very similar thing. You can draw on, especially on these, you can draw some of the metal out by friction. And I'm going to try and demonstrate this. This isn't actually steel, but I've thought copper might work better. This is a sharp edge on copper, and if you get a burnisher. You don't have to. I use the back of a really hard, I mean this is machine steel, gouge, turning gouge, and you just push just at the edge. I'm not flat, it's just at a slight edge. You push and the metal will flow. And eventually your fingernail will feel a little burr in there. Now that burr is really important for cutting. So if you did that on this, you could widen by fractional amount, widen this and also give this rough burry edge. Now having got that burr edge, you can, let's show an example of that. I don't know whether that makes sense, but there's a little burr edge that you've got by making it flow, and then after that you can go send it upwards at a different angle so that it's going to cut the wood better. You really have to experiment with this yourself. I don't know how long you can do this. I've made this reamer 30 years ago, and I'm still sharpening on occasions, sharpening it and bringing that burr edge out until I can just feel it, and sometimes I shift it up, sometimes I don't, but that is what does the scraping. The D bits that I make that I don't use anymore, they're quite easy to make. You just make yourself a little vise of some description like this. It's just got it's got a groove down the middle and it just holds them in place, and then with a file you can flatten things off there, so you've got a D. After that, the shape you're going for, I made a sort of wooden example here. That's your piece of round. You then drill a hole at a slight angle. This is a slight angle through it, and then saw off this like that. So I told you to file that off. You can also, on a bigger one, cut it off. And then after that, you want to remove all this parallel to the hole, so that that ends up really sharp along there. That's a sharp edge there, and you want to then cut back as much. You basically have to think about where it's going to cut. Here's a step drill, and you can see that's a sharp edge there, and that is at an angle, and that is at an angle as well, so that when that goes into the wood, the first thing that it's going to touch is that knife edge there. So that's, and the amount of step drills you can make, the variations on them are enormous really. This one I've got a removable feather in the middle. You can turn the smaller ones, I turn a little feather on there and then grind stuff out there. You just have to be adventurous and do it. I think these step drills are these parallel reamers are fairly self-explanatory, although this one I see I've actually put a little edge along there. I must have filed, I made this so many years ago, I must have filed out with a needle file that, and then you can sharpen it just a little bit by going up there now and then to make sure that that is really a sharp edge. Right, conical chanters, conical reamers. It's the big one, but don't be daunted by it. It's fairly straightforward. It's the sharpening of them afterwards, which takes a bit of time, and once you've got it sharp, treat it with respect. I make my reamers out of bright steel. I don't know what kind of steel it is, but bright bars of steel, 3/16 thick. Hopefully this side will be, one side will be flat. Glue paper onto it, really firmly glue it on, and then mark out your profile that you're wanting your reamer to be at. and what profile that is a matter for another video, but you may have, well, you will have measurements before doing it. So then you've got it marked out there, and then it's a question of in a chuck, hacksawing down there, and when you get to a certain length, you've got to then reverse your blade, put it in an angle so that you can carry on cutting down. So then you're left with a very rough spear, basically. And one of the infuriating things is that as you cut, I don't know where this comes from, whether it comes from the heat or whatever, it will bow. So this is bowed in one way. So you have to straighten things out. And the way to straighten things out is either in a vise and tugging, or or over, where's the hammer? Doing a bit of hammering at necessary spots. Having done that, you've still got this rough sawn edge. What I do is I've got a captive file, and it's a very sharp file. I only use it for this. And my trick is, it's engineer's blue basically, but it's a felt tip pen. You put felt tip pen mark on that, and then you can see the high spots. And you just have to keep filing those and keep checking that this is completely flat. And if it isn't flat, you have to flatten it out. And this isn't completely flat when it comes to it. And keep going until you've got one side. That's the first side, the smooth side that you started with. And then having got that completely flat and straight, you then turn over, and then with felt tip pen again, you mark that side, and then repeat the process on the other side until you've got two smooth sides. Exactly the measurement you want. That takes a while. Now you want to sharpen it, and the important thing to remember is what angle you want to sharpen it at. I seem to remember I sharpened this one too sharp, too right. In fact, I'll give a demonstration. Say that's your bore, and say you sharpen it really, you cut away all that there. That is going to just dig in. It's not going to scrape nicely. It's going to dig in and just will not, well, it'll jam basically. Because all the cutting you want to do, all the scraping rather you want to do, is on the diagonal, the maximum diameter. You don't want the cutting to happen too high or too low. It's the maximum diameter. So that's far too sharp. You can, that's probably too blunt. There's a nice medium somewhere to be reached, and you do it just the same as, I mean, with a felt tip pen. I put felt tip pen on, and also it helps to have some washers or some tubes there just to see how it's doing, whether you're at the maximum diameter. And then you have to smooth the back, but not smooth it too sharp. I don't know what. And the way I do that is I've created something that lives in the vise, and you can then hold your, this is quite adaptable, you can hold your vise, hold your reamer off, down in place, tighten that up, and then get going with the file, And I've treated myself to 3 really good files, and I never abuse these. I never use these on other stuff. And then you're sharpening the back, you're rounding the back, and it's a job of sculpting really, because when you get to this point, up here, you're actually moving, you're thinning the entire thing, because that's less than 3/16. And you have a go at that, and then you put you put your felt tip pen on and feed it into your chanter, which will be step drilled already. You will have step drilled it, and see where it's cutting and where it isn't cutting, and just keep working and filing and filing. Whenever you see something bright, a bright spot there, file that off, and you just get to the point where it fits in really nicely, and that's it really. Having got to that point, you then can put this burr edge on, which I explained to you, this burr edge, and that's what's going to be actually doing the cutting. I don't know whether I've described it very well, but I think if you're inventive enough and adventurous enough, you'll get there. Just another point about making handles, because I always make handles for them. That's easy peasy, and I love doing that. What you do is you get a chunk of wood, drill 2 holes in it, the size of some doweling you've got. Then saw down the middle, like that. Then you put your reamer on, make a groove so that it fits in there perfectly. Put them together with lots of glue there, lots of glue. Put them together, wallop your pins in with lots of glue as well, leave for a day or two, and then you can turn a nice handle. And if it needs be, you can put a screw through the reamer itself. So that makes a neat handle. That's about it. You're just going to have to keep working at it, and I'm sorry if I haven't given a good enough description, but I think you have to be inventive, and all the time you really have to think, how is this cutting? It's not just pushing it in. What is actually happening inside the bore when you're cutting? Well, there you are. I've tried to pack lots of information in, and I've sometimes found it very hard to describe. There's no substitute really for you being there and you seeing things, but I've done my best on this, and I've really enjoyed this. It made me think about stuff that I didn't really know. I did know, but I hadn't put into words before. And I've made 897 pipes as of last week, and I did a calculation, very rough calculation last night. That's well over a mile of drilling, and when I consider all the duds and rejects and think, oh God, there's one there that I made, it's probably more like 2 miles of drilling. It's not only been done by me, because I have friends who've come in and done some of the boring work. So I hope you've learned something about this. The next one I think is going to be possibly about how we make the air in these tubes that we've been making vibrate, or with reeds. Or I might make one about how we make the outside of the pipes look all pretty, in fact wood turning. Something appealing to the eye as well as the ear. So that's about it, but because you've stayed up so late, if you've got to this point, it's way past your bedtime, I was going to show you something which has nothing to do with pipe making at all. I bought some of these diamond drills for, I think it was 15 quid. There's a whole batch of them, about 8 of them. I saw on YouTube last night that they were selling a set of 15, I think, for £11, and they're amazing. So you can turn teapot into a flower pot just like that. So I've been having lots of fun with mugs and all sorts, just drilling with this. It's so quick. Bang! Now I've got a flower pot. I've got an amaryllis that I'm going to plant right away this afternoon. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you learned something.